All right, sorry for the delay, everybody. We had some technical difficulties, so I'm calling the meeting to order. Today is Thursday, March 14th. It is 5:06. This is the regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting. Those present, I have both Counselor Shoup and Counselor Cushing and myself present, so the committee is here as well as town staff. Item 3 is approval of minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Good.
All right, it's unanimous. All right, items number 4 is discussion. So we have a few items to discuss today. The first one I wanted to make sure we all kind of reviewed was the budget timeline. We have the presentation, I believe, at the end of the month. And so our work as a committee really gets underway quickly after that. And so just wanted to make sure we were all aligned on the different dates and times. Again, I think there's still probably room for discussion in terms of topics that could be on some of the meetings that we'll have scheduled that week or throughout April. But again, we don't need to decide those today. It can probably happen organically as we work through the process if we need to focus on specific things.
Just a quick screening of budgets.
Mhm.
Image there shows the general milestones.
Yep.
The presentation on the 27th. First reading, we do have a joint workshop scheduled with the Board of Education. And then second reading for your May meeting, the 15th,
Mhm.
all working toward the validation vote on the 11th of June.
Yep.
And then,
And the new ad, just for the
Mhm.
committee and the public, was originally we did not have a first reading on April 3rd. And I think just given some conversation I had with the chair, because this is a unique year, we want to make sure that we have a workshop on April 3rd between both the board and the council just to talk about what was presented, where we're going, and just make sure we're all on the same page as we work through the process. And again, if counselors want to give the committee any guidance as we work through the details, that's their opportunity to kind of give their direction, give their thoughts, so that way we can take that into consideration as we go through the process.
So I'm sorry. You were saying on April 3rd
Yep.
is just the first reading or a budget workshop. I won't be here on the week of the May 1st. So I just want to make sure that doesn't actually seem like something I would be missing though. That's just.
On May 1st, so, and again, we can talk about this because typically what we usually do is do a joint town council BOE workshop around that time period. Again, my experience was always, it was presenting the audit was really what that meeting became, because
Yeah.
that just happened to be when the audit was presented. I'm not sure if we need that particular workshop in the
Okay.
process. It's the same day as the public hearing. I mean, again, we can keep it on there as a placeholder potentially, but again, I've always felt when we got to that point, we didn't really talk about the budget, and we've been invited, and I think some counselors are attending the board budget discussions that happen next week. So again, next Monday and Tuesday, I think the board is kind of doing their view of the budget. And then again, they invited all of us to participate. So anybody's welcome to go and participate from the council, which I think many of us are going to be there. And then we're going to hear it again, probably on here on April 11th. And then, so I don't see the need to have another budget workshop unless, again, there's something that the school wants to share that's changed significantly. But again, we'll be working with the finance committee. So
I mean, that's a regular council meeting, so that is, essentially be a workshop before your council meeting. So we can keep it on the calendar if you don't feel you need it. We can.
leave it at the discretion of the chair and the vice chair if they
Sure.
want to remove it.
Did I hear you suggest though that you talked to the chair about a workshop on the 3rd?
Yes. And that's what I assumed when I look at this Wednesday, April 3rd, first reading budget workshop.
I was not aware that, I'm pleased to do a workshop on that night, but certainly the first reading, it'll be scheduled for action as a regular piece of business on that meeting.
Mhm.
I've not talked to the council chair about a workshop for that night, but I'm pleased to do one if you like.
Can you confirm?
Yep.
Do you mind confirming with him? I know we talked about it.
Okay.
And I recall him not saying there was anything pressing that we would need. And that's why when I saw this, Tom, I assumed you
Yeah,
guys had connected.
No, I'm not sure what that reference is, but I'll confirm and I'll circle back to all of you. Okay.
And that's what I assumed was the joint town council BOE workshop, like our first one.
I'll confirm that. I
Okay.
apologize for confusion. And then below, we've tried to fill in those 2 dates that you've chosen as a committee, those being kind of the afternoon, early evening of Thursday, April 11th, and then the following Friday morning, April 12th. And we've done our best to kind of pair up departments that make sense together. We've also done our best to accommodate needs of staff in the school. Admittedly, it's tight. It always is tight. The good news is you're doing this early and you've got a month on the back end of this before second reading, so as needed. And purposely, I put Liam and I at the very end of this, that if you find yourself pushed, we can certainly accommodate your needs, however they are. So we're pleased to give this a try, but just appreciate that we may need to pick a third date.
But we have our regularly scheduled finance committee meeting on the 18th, I believe.
There you
So
go.
I think we would, like, that would be, to me, if we had any carryover, we could
Sure.
always use that as carryover. I just also want to highlight, I don't think it's in here, that we did plan for some joint roundtables.
Mhm.
So again, when we put together the calendar, I think we tried to make sure that some of those would follow our committee meetings. So I think we have on the 18th of April, something from like an hour following our committee meeting where we would do a roundtable. We talked about doing one on a Saturday, so we have one on the 20th. And then we have one on the 22nd, which is after the school board's finance committee meeting. So it would follow their regularly scheduled meeting. And then we had another one on the 24th. So again, these were just dates. I know we talked about these a little bit at the communications committee meeting yesterday, because I think both the finance and the communications committee are jointly sponsoring these roundtables.
Mhm.
And we don't have to be at every single one of those. But we just need to make sure a counselor and a school board member are at each of those. So I'll work.
I was unable to attend any last year because
Mhm.
of the scheduling. I would appreciate being able to attend them this
Yep.
year, I guess, would be my feedback.
Yep, the only one I think that might conflict with you, Karen, is the one we have on the Monday following the school board finance committee meeting,
Right.
because doesn't work, but the other three I think should work.
You said the 18th and
Yeah.
20th of April.
We have 18th, 20th, and 24th.
22nd. Right?
Sorry, yeah, 18th, 20th, 22nd,
And 24th.
and 24th. Do we feel like we need 4, or could we get away with 3?
Historically, they've not been terribly well attended,
Mhm.
in my experience. Yeah.
I think my other suggestion, Counselor Anderson, would be to, especially since they're following, I think maybe having specific times would be helpful. So if we're gonna do one on the 18th, this generally wraps at 6:30 or 7, be definitive about
Yeah.
that. 6:30 to 7:30 is a roundtable.
Yep.
And then we can start, pushing these out
Yep,
in
I
early
have-
April.
I have 6:30 to 7:30 on the 18th, which would be following our meeting.
Okay.
Or Saturday, the 20th, I have from 10 to 11 AM. That's a Saturday, because again, we're gonna try and do one Saturday for people who have difficulty.
Do you have a location yet?
Well, I know somebody who knows where to find
Knows
these things.
I believe last year we did at the Public Safety Building, and I
Yeah.
think that one was, okay.
I think that would be good. And I'm assuming the other ones, we have space in council chambers, like if there's nothing following these meetings that we couldn't stay where we are. So if the school board is in council chambers, that we can stay there. The Saturday one might be the only one where
Right.
public
Just-
safety.
Do we have times for the Monday, the 22nd, Wednesday, the 24th, approximate?
5 to 6 for the 22nd,
Okay,
and for committee discussion, because for the 24th, that's where I had us having a finance committee meeting as well from 6 to 7:30. I don't know if that time works, or if we want to start at 5. So I don't know from the committee's perspective, if you're available, like if you have a time preference on the 24th to get together.
And these are all April dates you're talking about.
This is April. Sorry, let me share my screen.
Conservation Commission
Okay.
meets from 6 to 7:30. They would be in here, or we could kick them out.
Well, now we know your preferred dates and your time slots. We can pair that up with space
Yeah.
and circle back to you on that.
But I just want to make sure for the 24th, so not to conflict with. your-
I more want to have sessions that are at different times to,
Mhm.
for the public.
Yeah,
I think that's more my inclination, where we have one at 6:30, we want at 5, we want on the weekend. I wouldn't, I'm not worried about Conservation Commission so much
Okay.
as what would be good for residents
yeah, so if
and
we
their
could,
availability.
yeah, I mean, I think for the 24th one, that one seems to be the one that's like questionable in terms of what time will the committee meet? And then also, can we fit a round table in there? So in the calendar I shared, I put it at 6 o'clock is when the committee meets, and we meet from 6 to 7:30. But that would be preceded by a round table, so, yeah, 5 to 6,
So I'm sorry, we're having a finance committee meeting on April 24th,
yes. So we have from essentially 5 to 7:30.
or why are we having an extra one?
So this would be to just continue the work. So we have an extra meeting there, and then we have a potential meeting on the 3rd.
Um, May
Yeah,
3rd?
we had that as optional.
Yeah,
like,
I'm
we
out of
might
the
not have
country,
it.
May 3rd.
Okay. So maybe we'll just delete that one.
I'm not against that at all. I just, if there's extra meetings, I need them on my calendar
Yeah.
now. So April 24th. That's it.
Was this developed in communications?
No, this was what I shared with you guys. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, please.
When we were kind of trying to get the calendar up to date, let me just pull it up and share.
Did we do extra finance committee meetings last budget season? I'm
Yeah,
drawing a total blank. to
oh,
be
for
honest.
sure.
I just don't remember.
Yeah, you had 5 or 6 kind of budget review sessions. The attempt this year is to kind of do them in 2, but it might bleed over into another one. But then presumably there'll be some interest in further deliberation. You might want to dig deeper on something. I think these sessions, these first 2, really will be driven by staff presenting their budgets and kind of level setting things. And then I suspect there'll be follow-up questions and discussion items you want to dig deeper on.
Do you plan at some point, I guess, stating my preference at the beginning, you used the term level set, and something that would be extremely helpful to me is to understand what that means in terms of net budget. So in other words, if you look at the entire thing, and to my understanding, the term level services means to kind of hold fast in a stream that's pushing us backwards, to continue to do all of the work that's in progress, but we're not adding anything. And as I look at this, I ask myself, well, when I listen to the police department, I'm assuming they're going to make a great presentation and everything they're going to say is going to be justified. It would really help to have the context of what does this whole thing look like bottom line, so that we can kind of keep in our heads what is it that we may or not be adding to as we go along. And I don't know if
Yeah, I haven't, Counselor, I haven't finalized my work, but I'm quite confident in saying that my proposed budget is likely to be fairly near to a level services budget. And having said that, there are a number of department requests that I'll make you aware of that will not likely be as part. And that has proven to be fairly helpful, that we've kind of isolated them for awareness and for line of sight. And we attribute a dollar amount to it, so you can make some value decisions, whether that investment is a wise one. But I suspect the deliver I present to you will not include much of any new investment.
Okay.
And that's really given some other cost drivers we have just with level services and some other factors on the revenue side for us to meet that stated net goal. And I want to come as close to that as I possibly can out of the gate, frankly. And
Well, I guess that's a, so the net goal is 3% on our
5%.
side. I'm sorry,
Let's finish the schedule.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
can we, yeah, let's,
Yep.
let's make sure the schedule's good and then we can have more conversation on what to
I think it would
expect.
be helpful if you could follow up with all those dates,
Mhm.
roundtables, and let us
Yep.
know. To get those on the calendar.
Yeah. So again, just quickly to look at it, so you can kind of see for like the extracurricular stuff, I guess I would call it.
Right.
So we have our finance committee meeting on the 18th. That would have, because these are separate meetings. A joint roundtable would be following. Just for awareness, this was shared with us yesterday in the communications committee, but it looks like we'll have a revaluation workshop on the 17th. Where it sounds like we might get information that may inform the budget as well, so I think that's why making
Mhm.
sure we meet after that to discuss will be helpful. A joint roundtable on the 20th. The school board has their finance committee on the 22nd, so we have another roundtable following theirs that day. And then the finance committee would have another meeting on the 24th, followed by, or preceded by a roundtable. Again, we can flip those if we need to. It's just, I think I would plan from 5 to 7:30 to be available. And we may not need the full committee time either. So that's where some of these we're just gonna see as we work through it. We might cancel some meetings or may not need the full time. And then again, I would suggest that we don't need the joint workshop on the first, but again, if we can keep that on there and just leave it up to the chair and vice chair
Mhm.
of both the board and,
For scheduling purposes, it would be a workshop before your regular meeting. So if it's not that, we're likely to have another topic. So presumably you've already kind of booked that out.
and then again, we have our final recommendations tentatively scheduled on the 9th. So this is the normal meeting where it's like, okay, we've gone through the process. Do we need to change anything? What's our final recommendations of what we're proposing for second read? That would be part of the second read with amendments if we had
Mhm.
anything we wanted to propose.
So that, you're saying that's the May 9th agenda?
This would be on May 9th for the finance committee.
Not, having trouble with the microphone. Not to get off subject, but I actually have not gotten back to the Conservation and Land Board about, we had discussed putting them on the May agenda as well. Is
Mhm.
that gonna be too much?
No, I mean, I think we can fit,
Okay,
we can fit other stuff when we're meeting,
Okay.
so we don't, to me, we need to make sure we get the budget finalized, which we may be done at that
Okay,
point.
fair enough.
So it really just depends on where we are in the process, but we can definitely pencil them in if we want to make sure we have that conversation that day.
Mhm.
Right, any concerns, thoughts? I think everybody has this document, right? I know I shared it with you yesterday, Liam, after the comms committee meeting.
I saw it weeks ago. I'd forgotten about it, to be honest with
I
you.
have not.
I will reshare or make sure you guys have it. Sorry,
Just include me on that too, if you would. Just,
put it at the top of your inbox.
yep, perfect.
Norm, do you want it? Norm? Karen?
Share around.
Share it with everyone. Okay,
Good. We'll check on space availability and flag any concerns there.
great. All right, moving
Good,
on
thank you.
to the next item. So again, we just wanted to check in on Alger Hall.
Mhm.
And given that there's been another prospective buyer that's come forward, I think just have a discussion on next steps with any analysis based on
Yeah,
any conversations that have
sure. Our
happened.
conversations with Land Trust were really around them leasing the facility. It was never about buying. There's frankly, they were not and are not in a position to buy. And as you alluded to, somewhat out of the blue, but I guess we shouldn't be terribly surprised, but the Historical Society kind of has come into focus and has expressed intense interest in Alger Hall. And I think I've been able to appreciate how that came about. Andrew Mackey, the executive director of the Land Trust, reached out to them. I think that was just being neighborly and wanted to see if there were areas of collaboration and just, being neighborly. And I think at that time in that meeting, apparently, he said, if you have interest, you ought to express that. When they certainly took his advice and have done that. They've been quite clear, and I think they've communicated directly with council members on 2 occasions that I'm aware of. And so their interest continues. The land trust, for their part, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they were perhaps have said as much. They're not interested in getting in the middle of a kind of a contest. And I very much appreciate that. So they've kind of bowed out of Ultra Hall at this point, and their need still exists. And to that end, I did arrange for the land trust to tour a property owned by the Historical Society that they intend to sell and just produce cash for their own pursuits. That tour was done last week, and the land trust has followed up pretty quickly that it was just not the right space and just a massive undertaking. It's a huge 4,000 square foot house that, you know, is in need of a lot of attention, like all old houses do. And just to renovate it to suit, you know, kind of office administrative needs was just too much. So at this point, the only one standing is the land trust, excuse me, the Historical Society.
Okay.
And I guess I'm interested in pursuing that to its logical end. Again, we were willing to do a long-term lease, really because we've identified no specific municipal use for Ultra Hall, and that certainly remains to be the case. So I guess the question I would have, in terms of pursuing a sale, I could certainly go through a conventional, traditional sale, you know, have a broker put it on the MLS system. I would recommend against that in large part due to the same reason we bought the property, because I think the wrong person buying that, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but the wrong use at that facility could be detrimental to our interest next door at the firehouse and the society behind them. So I think some sort of negotiated sale with a preferred buyer is the way to go. And so it really begs the question, how do we make sure that we're selling it for a fair price? We did an appraisal of sorts, really an opinion of value when we bought it to assure that our purchase price was accurate and appropriate. That's a bit dated, 3.5 years, and things have happened in the market. So I would not rely entirely on that. So we could go through a similar process and frankly tell them what we want for the property. We could also, another approach potentially is we know what we have into it in terms of purchase price and investment for roof and masonry. I would certainly look to recapture all of our expenses to date. I think that's another way to kind of get to price. In any event, we do have a policy that requires me to go through a pretty elaborate process, soliciting input from various town staff, town committees, and so on and so forth, whenever we're considering sale of municipal property, to make sure that we're not missing something that, and so that is probably a 60 to 90-day process by the time I put people on notice and harass them for their responses. And so just to, for everyone to appreciate kind of timeline, I don't know that the society is in a terrible rush, and I don't think that kind of timeline would scare them. So that's a couple of considerations I put out there for reaction.
Yeah. I know it goes through the Land and Conservation Land Board.
It does.
I love to see them do something in 60 days. So I think the expectation needs to be there, and they have an application before them. Can I speak generally to the proposal? I mean, I'm disappointed that we can't help Scarborough Land Trust, but I think it would benefit the town to sell that and make some money.
Mhm.
I think the questions or concerns I have is, I mean, I know you bought it because you wanted to preserve that property and maintain it with that little municipal little campus right there. And
Mhm.
so if we did sell it to the Historical Society, I mean, what's stopping them from, we're out of money in 10 years, selling it to whoever they want?
Yeah, I would look for some sort of deed restrictions, frankly. It would certainly include a right of first refusal for the town, that if they ever find themselves in a position of selling, that we would have first right to buy it at the time. But beyond that, I would look for some sort of, I guess easement would be the terminology.
Covenants.
Perhaps deed covenants or easements to make sure that we can pass through their property, which we do currently, to park on some of those side lot spaces. And conceptually, I've had that conversation with folks at the society and their they're fine with the concept. Obviously, we need to hammer out those details. So again, the value of them is they're kind of first cousins of ours, right? And they're not it's not, I wouldn't characterize this as a hard-nosed deal, but we need to assure the taxpayers that we're getting a fair price for it.
Yeah, I don't think using a broker is necessary. I think also because of the issues surrounding what we're doing is
Right.
we're asking for, oh, we're selling it to you, but we also still want to maintain the right of first refusal and things like that. I think that justifies not using a broker. I think we should definitely get an updated market value, but I don't want to go through that whole process.
Yeah, and just a final piece, when you start to put encumbrances, right of first refusal and any kind of use restrictions, that has an effect on value as well. So that needs to be considered.
Counselor Cushing?
So, yeah, seems with that timeline, that we are going to be doing this revaluation. I know the tax value of the building right now is like 345,000 or something of that nature. And I'm not sure where that stands in terms of the market, but at least one way to sort of benchmark the price, given the fact that all of the other stuff you have to do will impact on that, says that we sort of already have a process. And to my mind, I would just be interested in ensuring that the same criteria that we were using with the land trust in terms of preserving that space for us without having to continually maintain it, that if we can build a deal that satisfies that, I think that you get to wash your hands of it, which is not a bad thing.
No.
And I think that the Historical Society gets a bigger place to do their thing. I'm sure you're aware, I went down there. I'm not a big history fan, but I was pretty impressed with the stuff that they have in there, and they are classic hoarders if you go upstairs into the attic, but not the pathological kind. So you know, I think that strikes me as a win-win for everybody. And I am recalling on a couple of occasions, as we were asking for information from the land trust and so forth, Mr. Mackey indicating kind of, well, you know, we can find other options. And I take him at his word. And so I'm happy that we're able to pursue this. So maybe where we should leave it is just keep us up to date. Let us know if there are any snags, and yeah, and I also don't think we need, I mean, we didn't have any kind of a, you know, competitive bid process or anything with the land trust. So I think that, you know, we have a similar organization that caught wind of it and seems to be offering a better deal. So
I think what's important mostly in this sale is what Counselor Shoup said, and Tom, what you shared about like the intent of us purchasing this was really to preserve our own interests right there. And so making sure as we sell it, we keep it top of mind, and that to me feels like the process you want to take makes sense. I don't know if I feel like this committee needs specific updates on this. I would be comfortable with this just being something in your town manager's report and go through normal council. I don't know if there's any more additional work this committee would need to do around this at this point.
fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll need council action to actually
Yeah.
proceed and go through the formal process. I'd like to do a little more legwork so I could maybe describe process more clearly and definitively, and maybe even in the financial aspects as well. I hadn't mentioned, but my recommendation would be, since we use land bond funds, these monies should go back, be replenish the land bond.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
So
I just assumed it would.
Yeah.
I think we need to be clear, because that would be realized as revenue. We need to make sure we know where it's going. And so to your point, if we can achieve our initial policy objectives of securing historic property, protecting our interests next door, and put money back to conservation, it really checks a lot of boxes. Okay, I'll do some further work and talk to council leadership as to how and when to bring this back.
Yep, that's good. All right, and the next item is to continue the conversation last time from the cost to serve model. I know we had to rush Karen through it, so I wanted to make sure that the committee had an opportunity. If you had any questions or other discussion points, I know I had shared with Karen post-meeting 10 or so questions that I had that she responded to in kind in the memo in the packet. But again, if there's other things that counselors have questions on, now's the opportunity to talk to Karen.
And if I could go through this presentation, I tried to narrow it down and it's really a combination of some of the material from the previous presentation, as well as weaving in really some of the questions that you documented. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Just want to have Liam run that for you.
No, because I snuck in an extra slide at the end in case we had time that should
Yeah.
interest everyone.
Can we just make sure in the council packet that we publish the
Yes.
material, that and the material I shared, just to make sure that all that information is in the packet?
Okay. And you sent that by email shortly after the last meeting?
I mean the calendar that I shared.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. And what is our time constraint this evening?
6:30.
I have about 20 minutes on impact fees, just to set expectations.
So you have about 40 minutes, Karen,
I can do that.
or less.
There's no points off for being
less.
short.
So 30 and 30, Karen, how's that?
Okay. Okay, we're used to that terminology, 30 and 30.
By 30.
Okay. All right, so what I did want to do is really go back and remind ourselves of some of the principles of the fiscal impact model. And then there are a couple of big questions that I think we have. That some of them you alluded to, and it's really helpful to make sure that we're all in agreement about this.
Mhm.
And then I got tired of writing fiscal analysis, fiscal impact, so I'm calling it the FEM from now on. It's not the sexiest title, but it is shorter. So I do want to come back and say, what's the purpose? This really is, it's a tool for the council. It's not a bill to the developer. It really is best for larger projects. And I can go into more detail, but Tom probably doesn't want me to, on why it's best for large projects. But it's just a matter of modeling tends to work better on larger projects because you're using averages.
Karen, could you just give me a ballpark of what you mean by large? I mean,
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but it should be perhaps multiple. A mixed use project is probably good. I would say of a larger scale of, at least 10,000 square feet plus residential. Or if it's a single project, I'm going to say, 50,000 square feet or more. It's just the way I explain it is like if you had two single family houses and I'm using my model to predict the children in two single family houses, I'm probably going to get that wrong, but because I'm using townwide averages. But if I had a pack of 50 houses, I'm more likely to get that right because of averages. A single average never works on a single house or a single business.
Yeah.
So,
If I could just offer, I think it also could be very useful for a project that's very specific. So we've got a request for a contract zone to build a 128 two-bedroom multifamily. This tool gives us the ability with even a pretty high degree of accuracy of understanding what's the revenue potential that flows from a project at that scale and size, and what are to the point here, what are the costs to serve that population?
I don't want to belabor this, but to me, this is the crux of the whole thing, because when people misapply the use of the model in discussion of decisions that come before us, we have members of the public who come up and say, what about the cost to serve? And so really nailing down when this is appropriate to use and saying we're using it on this project, but we're not using it on this project specifically because its reliability is not helpful. And so
Would it, finish this as specific, would it apply to a decision when we needed to make a CEA about an affordable housing project?
It can, it can. I think it's, you do it and then you look at it critically and say, hey, does that mimic what we're seeing on the ground? And we can usually point out where we have less accurate information, you know, and. you
Where
know,
it may
take
not
with
be
a grain of
fair,
salt.
think of the 3i Home project. That was a single
Right.
project in the context of a much larger mixed use development.
Yeah.
And it's not fair in that context to simply isolate that one project and because it really needs to be appreciated in the context of the overall development it's in, because there's some have high demand and low demand. It's the averaging out over.
I think you're absolutely right,
Scale.
Tom. And my first exposure
That's right, you were
to
here.
cost of serve was
there.
around that project.
Mhm.
And it became very clear to me that it wasn't really applicable for the reasons that you just stated.
Yep.
And yet there was a perception that somehow, we weren't accurately predicting what the flow of this whole thing is going to be to your tax dollars.
And there were two issues with that one, because back in 2018, when we looked at the downs, part of the reason we wanted to do this fiscal impact model was our look is because there were so many different uses. And the theory was that if you have commercial development, non-residential development coming along with housing, that you could balance some of the impact of new housing because of the cost of students. So that increase and mix of commercial, industrial coming along with the residential tended to balance it. And that's what we were looking for. That was one of the things on the table about why the downs, could be good for the town, because it's bringing different types of development along at the same time. And so all along, 3i Home was part, maybe not the name 3i Home, but the downs all along had senior facilities and other types of housing in there that was really analyzed as part of a total. Another place that it could be useful, and it may have to have a little bit of shaping on it, but I'm thinking of the proposals from the Conservation Commission. We want to look at what's the impact of taking land out of or restricting developable land on areas within the growth plan or the growth area. So it seems to me that is something you could take a look at, and we could adapt it to look at that raw land. But that's a bigger project because it's talking about a lot of acreage, not just a single plot.
Yeah.
And so that's something that could be looked at.
So really the message is the scale matters
Yes.
with accuracy. So while we could use it for smaller projects, it just requires probably a lot more caveats, and it's not as simple, just add in a couple factors and run it. You're gonna have to.
Yeah, the margin of error increases the smaller the project is.
And so we first did this in evaluating the down CEA. That was really our first introduction. And we're anxious 5 years in to actually do it again and see how far we're off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then in the first big question, the thing that we got a lot of criticism for back in 2018 is, hey, why aren't you considering capital costs in the fiscal impact model? And so at the time, and to this day still, my response to that is, well, two things. One, when the downs came to us originally, it hadn't been through the planning process. We didn't know all of the particular infrastructure, except for some theoretical big pieces. We didn't know that detail. That happens in the planning process. Also, they pay for that. So we were not on the hook for all the intersections that they needed to improve. We're not paying for the sidewalk on off-site areas that the Downs is putting in. So it didn't really belong in the fiscal model. That's why we focused on the services. Now, I'm not saying maybe there's something that belongs there, but in general, those things the developer creates, those problems the developer creates, they are responsible for.
Right, either through on-site or off-site improvements they physically make at their expense with their own hands or their contractors, or impact fees.
Mhm.
So think of it this way, this focuses on operational expense, whereas impact fees really focus on the capital costs.
So we're not ignoring them. We're just saying, hey, that comes out of a different pot.
And the new developments are essentially paying their fair share based on their contribution
Right.
for that need.
Yeah, to our knowledge,
Yeah.
there's always an outlier of some weird thing that comes along,
Mhm.
but that's life. But there are a couple of occasions where infrastructure comes into it, and it's more about, hey, we're not going to do this development unless we get some help on a major piece of infrastructure. And that's really where we were, with the Downs. So we didn't necessarily have all of the capital costs that were identified through the planning process, but we did know that they felt like they were going to be paying, I forget now, I think $255 million worth of investment in various infrastructure. The majority, or a big piece of that was the trunk line of the sewer system, not the sewer lines that come off to serve like the Innovation District or housing, that just big trunk line that was coming in. And so that is really where you have that public-private negotiation of, here's the guess, and where we were, and Tom can certainly add on to this, is the town's perspective at the time was, well, when we did Higas Parkway, we paid for everything and we're paying ourselves back. And we didn't want to do that again. We wanted to put that risk on the developer. So we were saying, yes, we will reimburse you for a portion of that, but you're building it, you're financing it. And if you don't do well, not our fault that you can't pay it back, or that it won't be paid for. So all of that risk got put on the developer. But we did agree to pay 40% of our our tax revenues to offset some of those costs. So that's the difference. You've got a major piece of infrastructure that, but for this piece of infrastructure, the project won't move forward. And that's when you start looking at, the CEA, if you will.
So Karen, that 40% is really regarded as the town's investment. And the return on that investment, as I understand it, after all of the CEAs and TIFs and so forth, is new tax revenue. And that at the end of the analysis, what we end up with is a return on the investment of those tax rebates.
Yeah, consider another way, we give them 40% of taxes paid on new value they create. So that means we hold back 60%, and the real simplification is that it's going to cost us more than 60% of those tax revenues to service their needs.
Mhm.
That's
That,
in its essence.
that is the question. And that so far seems to, do we have an indication of which direction that's heading?
We
That's
do.
the new analysis.
We
that you
did.
do, right?
Okay,
We did then, and we freshened it up now.
all right.
Yes, yes. So that's just the difference when we talk about infrastructure, enabling infrastructure that would allow a project to go forward. That's different from all the other pieces of infrastructure and capital improvements that a developer might have to make.
I'll see my 10 minutes just because I think it's important. At the point I was gonna make. Go ahead, I'll come back to it.
Okay,
I still will see my 10 minutes. though.
Yeah, okay.
so I guess I do want to stop there and make sure, are you comfortable with that concept? That's the reason we're not putting roadway improvements or intersection improvements. It's because somebody else is paying for it. So that's why we're not looking
Yeah.
at it.
So where my brain was going, and I may be complicating it, but I can get behind your recommendation was like, for some of these developments, they get us to a tipping point where we have to make a certain investment that we wouldn't otherwise have to make because all of a sudden we get a surge and it exceeds capacity to provide level services. And again, I don't know what the examples of that would be, but that's where I was like, are there things like that that are,
Yes, and I think, and there's two different pieces to that, because I think there's a little of that on when we're talking about just service delivery. But my understanding, when the project goes through planning, let's take the schools out of it for right now. When the project goes through planning, that's the traffic movement permit. They've looked at the future and said, you guys are gonna have to do all of these improvements before you can begin. And so that's really, that future piece is accounted for. Again, it's always accounted for in today's world. Let's hold the thought on the services for a second, because that's just what I'm about to talk about.
Counselor Shute might have had a, we're going for the mic.
but I'm gonna wait for you to speak.
Okay. So this is why the fiscal impact model focuses on service levels, focuses on the delivery of services. And it does aim to match the current service level. It's not saying, I was trying to think how to explain this. So it says, we're going to give you an amount of money that will allow you to pay for this same service level over here at the Downs. So it's not saying you have to stretch these resources over here that you're already spending on the level of service. It's just saying we're going to allocate that same amount of money for that service level. Now, if you make a decision in the future to change that service level for the entire town, then you're likely raising taxes on everyone, right? So I just want to make it clear that when I say it's building in the current service level, there's revenue there to provide that current service level to the area that we're analyzing.
Mhm.
Okay, Don, go ahead.
Speak, I'll hold my peace.
I'm trying to see where my question fits in, and I guess it sort of fits in here, because in the memo that was in the packet, you talk about police and fire levels of service, and you say the current model does not account for the changes in level of service for departments. And I think that's where I feel like we failed, because, I mean, it doesn't matter how many kids are coming out of a huge development. I feel like population-wise, could we have done a better job to say, when a town meets this size, this level of population, your school is going to be this big, your fire department needs to be this big. This triggers, because what I'm hearing from the new fire chief especially is like national standards. I'm like, well, if you're being dictated by national standards, then there must be a point where and it's not through planning board, because they do not deal with this at all.
Mhm.
And that's where we're going, okay, we're proposing this huge development, and we understand, we don't know how many kids are coming, but when your population reaches this threshold, you're gonna need a new school. You're gonna need another fire department, you're gonna need more fire lieutenants, et cetera. And what I'm hearing is this doesn't address that. And you talk about a tipping point, and I was like, we didn't address the tipping point. I feel like we're beyond the tipping point personally as a resident. And so I don't know how to factor that in.
Okay, so did you want to add to that before we?
Well, I get that we want to figure out what the impact is, what's the cost to serve a given development. And then we have this whole separate conversation about having the development in the first place and the town, I'll use the term investing in that development. And the question, which does come back to what Karen is talking about, is that just by virtue of the number of permits that are issued out there means that the population will increase. Those units will fill up.
Yep.
So that, and so much of this is really, to your point, it's about population growth.
Mhm.
And so in my limited understanding of this whole process is that we really don't have a choice about growth necessarily, at least until we can't stop it. We can't just put up a fence or a wall if that's your preference. And so the best thing that we can do is we can manage it. So we have a growth ordinance that's designed to manage it. And what I find missing in the conversation in the big long term is really how are we employing all these tools to manage what the public cares about. So to be able to explain, look, if we're going to have, if we can't stop it, then if we put it in a high density situation, so on and so forth, then that will have lower cost to us. It will spread all of our city services across a larger N, which should, help, in theory, should be moderating the growth of taxes.
Sure.
Do I generally understand that correctly?
That's, yes,
Well,
yes.
Can I just, say, I agree with that. I think maybe we're talking, you and me, I think we share a different concern that I don't think this model is going to address, which is this is looking at cost to serve for operating budget. But I think what we're concerned about is, but there are consequences outside of that with the population that may trigger all of a sudden we need to make a big investment in something. So maybe it's more like when we do this and use this model, we need to make sure that we're asking those questions of, okay, well, what does this mean in terms of roadway congestion and new traffic investments we may need to make? And are we committed to making those
That's
when
the
we're
key.
making this decision? Because I don't think we can look at them separately. I think we have to say, okay, this is gonna put us over capacity for our schools if we approve this.
Well,
Do we have a plan to make sure that we are gonna have the facilities we need? So when this goes in, we're not in the situation.
well, I'm wondering if you can flow this into impact fees. So if I'm saying
Yeah.
we
Exactly.
identify that, we have identified that at this level, there is a change in level of service. So guess what, new developer? Your impact fee is actually going to be 10 times more than it was because we have now identified that we are at a threshold and we need another fire department and we need another school. And like, I just don't, like, I want to deter development. Sorry, I will say that. And so I'm saying like, I feel like the impact fees have not justified the development that we've had to date. And
Right.
I'm wondering if we can take this to.
But they can't
those.
by law.
Right.
The impact fees are intended to capture the impact of a particular development. It's not to solve all the problems of the past.
So what I'm saying is, can you narrow down to a number and say, at a certain threshold, a town's population requires, I mean, the police chief is telling, the fire chief is saying, this is national standard. We are
Right.
not meeting it. Should we
So
take
Karen,
more money?
what I think you're asking for is in a different form of accounting. What you're talking about here is a stepped cost. So if you
Yeah.
think about an employee is very often a stepped cost. There's a place where, if your staff is getting stressed and so forth, and they're overworked, and you can probably go this far, and then you get that employee, and for a period of time, you're overstaffed until you get to the next step. And that very simple concept, I think, is what you're talking about, is that from a population standpoint, you go along with your existing schools, your existing fire department, all of that big stuff. And then you use the term threshold, but you're right. You hit a step. And it seems to me that with respect to national standards that people refer to, that there's probably data out there that says, what can we expect? And to your threshold, when are we going to have to cross a step?
But if done right and thoughtfully, if we have a choice in the matter and land use doesn't dictate everything, will have financial resources to make that step. And I'd use the Downs project as a good one. We've been charging it, traffic impact fees for 30 years, never collected enough to do the project that was envisioned 30 years ago. They, because of their size and scale, combined with some state funding, was the jumpstart we needed. And sure enough, they're, much to their chagrin, investing in 32 intersections in town.
Mhm.
They put us over we've been at that threshold in failing situations for decades. They're helping us finally solve the problems that we should have done 20 years ago. So it's kind of double-edged, for sure. I'll also make the point that fires is interesting example, because at the same time, we're trying to convert how we're staffing that. We're moving from a call division and per diem based employee system to full-time professional firefighters. And so that transition is happening. And so, yeah, you're seeing a lot of new bodies being added. It's really replacing bodies that we have now. We're just paying, they're now full-time employees rather than part-time per diem employees. And so some of that, it seems like we're doing a lot, and intuitively you'd think, well, it must be because of all these new people who have come. In part, that probably is playing a role, but we're transitioning our staff, at least in the fire side.
I think what will make me comfortable with this as a companion piece, if and when we use it, is making sure that there's a clear investment plan that's associated with it that says, we need 4 more firefighters, we need XYZ to make this a true analysis. And if we don't do those things while this project takes shape, then we run the risk of service degradation and issues with town, which we want to not do. And so to me, there's like a linkage ultimately to budget, where whatever happens when these big decisions are made, we need to make sure we understand what that means from a budgetary perspective, so that we can make sure when the budget comes forward, we're like, remember, guys, you approved this,
And this,
and now you need to approve 4
and this is
firefighters.
all
by-"
related. I mean,
Yeah.
so long as our zoning is encouraging or allowing the sort of growth that we want, and it's in the location that we want, all those sorts of things put us in a better position of being able to pay for those.
Mhm.
And I just want to I want to make sure we're, number one, take out capital improvements.
Yep.
And the school is one, because we're gonna have a school impact fee, and eventually when we figured out what we want to do with the schools, there's gonna be, a significantly higher impact fee. So that's where that's what's supposed to pay for that. And again, the way I think about the Downs are any of the projects that we would do, you may wind up hiring more staff because you have this additional money. Again, it's going to be at the same level of service, but to the extent that departments want to say, hey, I need a new person for every 3,000 people, we can add that to the model. That's what I'm saying. This is a tool for you guys. We can add on to it and improve it every single time we have a new methodology to do that. And I think that's totally makes sense in terms of how many people we have and what's that next step. Just want to make sure, okay, I think we've talked about these current deficiencies would need to be identified and targets established for those thresholds. And that's really not me. Departments have to do that, so I just want to, I will create many things, but
I think the point for us to remember is that this model's not going to give us the decision. It's going to give us a
Exactly.
decision, a data point, and then there's other things surrounding it that I think that's what we're talking about, is like, this
Exactly.
is great. I want to see the fiscal impact, but then I want to make sure there's an investment plan
Yeah.
to keep services whole, so that we know.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's your tool. And what I would say is, hey, whenever you're close, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it does mean you got to start thinking about what that next step is. Okay, so let's talk about education again. And listen, it really is the marginal cost piece that I think is the right answer for the model to use. But I'm going to tell you, with the Downs, I've done it both ways, and it works. if it makes you feel more comfortable putting in 100% of the school budget, I mean, methodology wise, it's probably not the best, but if you want to see what that looks like, you know, on the Downs project, there's enough money flowing that it takes care of whichever you want. So again, you know, the difference is it's about what, 14,600 for a student in terms of marginal costs. It's about 18,700
Yep.
for the full. And
That's because we're not gonna duplicate the central office. We're
Yep.
not gonna have a second superintendent. There's,
Yep.
there's costs that we're already incurred that we're not gonna double, you
right.
know, or.
And we
add
didn't
on.
try to carve that up, like, we didn't take every school and say, hey, there's not gonna be a second principal. Well, we didn't do that. We only took that approach with the central office. So,
All told, we're capturing, even with the marginal cost approach, 78% of costs.
But I guess the assumption is there are certain fixed costs within the school that won't change as a result of the
Right.
project, and so we're not accounting for those.
right,
But again, I guess the question is, but do any of those get to that step piece that Don was saying, where all of a sudden we get to a threshold where now
Right.
we need more administrative support
right.
because there's just more work to do.
Exactly. And I think that's when the numbers are close, you're gonna want to ask yourself that question.
Can you explain to me how, on a marginal cost basis, one student adds 14,000 to the cost?
No. I'm just gonna say all I did was take the total net budget for the school and I subtracted out the main office and maybe a couple of other things. There was, you know, some general agreement, I think, in terms of what was marginal and what was not. But yeah, in terms of what's in that marginal cost is all the teachers, all the principals, all the maintenance on the schools, anything that had to do with an individual school, that's all in that $14,000 a student.
So that's truly an example of a step cost. Because if your enrollment goes up by one, you're not gonna find
Yeah.
$14,000 in change.
No, in the near term, you're gonna be increasing class size, or you're gonna have
Yeah.
an additional seventh grader.
But-
So it's
Exactly.
18
So
rather
the
than.
real issue here is a project of a certain scale, okay?
Mhm.
It comes back to that thing where if you're gonna add 50 students, then nobody's gonna argue with your model.
Right.
But if it looks like if this project is going to add 10, then I suppose the question is, all right, so this one adds 10, the next one adds 10, and
But if it adds
Yeah, so-
500, you'd wanna know that.
sooner
Yeah.
enough it comes, but
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's
I just think that if it eliminated a point of argument, it seems to me that the difference between 18 and 14, given all of the other variables, might be false precision. This is a big number, obviously, but you know, the ear that I'm listening to this with is to be sure that when we get to the end of this process, we have something that can be explained to the skeptics. Because we have some history of people latching on to various things to discredit what in my analysis seems to be well thought out, useful work. And so that's, I believe, sort of where this discussion originated.
Mhm.
And so anything we can do to improve confidence in the modeling and the thinking and the analysis, so we can track it back to, yes, we are not, yes, we are listening. We've heard from the podium, that, again, the 3I thing was, well, you're not paying attention. Well, it strikes me that you all, not me, but you all have been paying very, very clear attention. And so that's, there are others who my colleagues have more financial acumen on these things than I do, so that's my,
And that's why, both are in the model. I'm saying, theoretically, you want to use the marginal cost, but I'm not going to argue. We're going to look at both and both do fine.
And the reality of this, the big picture is that this is big enough and complicated enough, and there's enough assumptions built into it. If someone wants to find fault, you can find fault. We're
Yes.
not here saying this is perfect. But it certainly gives, we're confident that it gives us, will give you good information kind of directionally.
Yeah.
And in some cases, some really quite accurate information. And I think that's all we can expect that it designed to do.
I think what we get into sometimes is the argument of accuracy versus precision, right, with folks, and I view this as a very accurate model for decision making.
Mhm.
We won't know if it's precise because it's a model, and so it's gonna be,
But with the
90%
downs,
accurate.
with the downs, we did it at the front end, we
Yeah.
baselined it, and we'll do it at intervals,
Yeah.
and we can check ourselves and see.
Yeah, and tweak and adjust.
Yeah.
to get it
Exactly.
more
That is the
precise.
important part of this is, particularly as issues come up and as the council makes different decisions about types of services that they want to have, that changes things. And we adapt each year for whatever happens. We're adapting each year for the costs. And just, we start with, whenever we do this, we start with the latest budget data that's available. And then we apply our cost per service, if you will, and then we apply a percentage increase. And, we've set it up now that we can change that with a flick of a
So
finger
the
here with
factor
changing it.
is representative of actual costs. It's pulled directly from our most recent budget.
Right.
And then it's pushed forward with escalators.
And so that's what I wanted to make sure you knew, that we weren't taking a static cost of today. We're saying, we're going to start with that. And, and for public works, we wrap all their costs, whether it's snow, trash, whatever, and maintenance into a cost per mile of roadway. And that's where there's a couple of things that you'll see why the Downs tends to come out very efficiently. They have a very small number of roadway miles compared to, if you try to take the same amount of housing in a different development, they'd have a lot more roadway.
Yeah, they're gonna have 8 miles of roadway with as many as 2,000 units at full build out. Compare that to any one of our traditional subdivisions. You're looking at 10 times as many lane miles.
Mhm.
And so we start out with what, $33,000 a mile, and by the end we're at $88,000 per mile. So each year that cost increases. In police and fire, we do two things. One, we look at the number of calls, and the police. We had some data originally in 2018 that looked at 3 years worth of calls and assigned them to different types of uses. And that's where we got our original data of how many calls per year does a single family home generate? How much does a industrial 1,000 square feet generate? And we looked at all of these different uses, and that was from the original 3-year data back in 2018. So this year, what I did is I said, all right, well, police, fire, tell me what your calls are, and let me use the factors that we used per service area, per land use, and see how close I got. And it was remarkably close to generating the amount of calls. The one thing I found out, or I discovered, was it was probably overestimating a little bit the police calls per single family. So I adjusted that, I tweaked that down just a little bit. And when I did that, it came out, it doesn't match exactly. It comes out very close for estimating an actual data set. So that's where those numbers come from. And what we do is just take their budget and say every call is about $273, and we say, how many calls did single family homes generate? Apply that to the $273 per call. And we, did that for police and fire. Fire has a higher expense. And by the way, the EMS dollars of reimbursement is already taken out of this. So we're not double counting,
Keep
we-
moving.
Okay, we already talked about schools, community services and the library. We just said population is the right generator for that. And so those are the factors. There was a question about what shareable meant. When we generate revenues, they come from a couple of different sources. We've got property tax, then we've got a little bit of value that's assigned to their original assessed value that still gets paid for. And then we have excise tax. So the original assessed value has to be subtracted out. You can't share with the CEA. That's not subject to the CEA. And so that's about, in the downs, about $7 million, 7.7, something like that.
Mhm.
And then excise tax, it's not shareable. We keep 100% of that. And so I calculated both of those, took it out for calculating the credit enhancement agreement share, put it back in for calculating the dollars available in the cost to serve. And the Norm's office was very kind and did some, pulled all of the car registrations in the downs for us so that we could get a pretty accurate count of what's going on at the downs.
Karen, very quickly on that point, we're talking about cost to serve, but all of those automobiles also have an impact on traffic.
Yep.
And I just wanted to sort of put an asterisk there as we are looking at projects. I don't know if it's relevant, it's included in this, but that's another dimension of a project that tracks all the way back to a town concern.
And that traffic is analyzed through the planning process and they pay.
That's where the impact fees come in.
Yeah.
Those trips are captured and they're responsible for making improvements either on-site, off-site, to handle those additional trips.
And then I did want to look at this is the 2023 housing sales for Scarborough, January through December. Guess it's implied since I said 2023, but just to give you a sense of what the pricing is out there now. And so the average price of the 214 single family homes that were sold was $743,000. If they're brand new single family, that price was a little bit higher, except oddly in the downs. In the downs, those single family brand new houses are going for about 670, 680, 700 in that range. Partly because less acreage, they've got smaller lots, and they're a little bit smaller in terms of square footage. And the other thing I wanted to point out is, so 283 units were sold, only 68 of them were brand new. So there's a lot of turnover. We know that from the census. Census tells us probably 10% of our population turns over every year. We don't have a 10% growth rate, but we do have a 10%, I call it the churn rate, people moving in, people moving out. So it's just important to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of change happening. There's nearly 300 units, but only a small percentage of them, 24%, are the new units. And also I wanted to let you know that, when you start calculating, that 60% residential note that Nick said, at least in 2023, those percentages are way over 60%.
Just
in terms
as
of
a
the
quick
increase.
aside, the school department does registration for the schools, and I remember this distinctly. I think it was before all of your time. It was probably late July when kindergartners were signing up, and they said, "We've got 91 new kindergartners coming in that we didn't have last year. Where are they coming from?" And so people were wanted to know. So respecting the confidentiality, but of course the school department knows the address where these kids are coming from. So we correlated that with assessing data, And 94% of those students were coming from housing stock that was 5 years or older. It wasn't brand new houses, it was
Yeah. it's
existing
turnover.
single family or what have you. And so that churn is real.
Yeah, and my concern about that is in our enrollment data, just knowing that we're an aging population, I would assume there's gonna
Yep.
be more turnover. So even from the school perspective, like what they've showed is that best case scenario, not assuming turnover. I think they look at the resale as part of it, but still, I anticipate at some point there's gonna be a lot more reselling potentially happening.
And I pointed out in the memo, it's just such a weird time to be able to try to do this relationship between new development and students, because while the trend kind of follows building permits a little bit, the number of students has decreased over time. So it hasn't increased.
We're at the 10-year low for overall student population.
Yeah.
There's unique effects within the phases of school, and that's
Right.
always, there's always a bubble that comes through. But if you look at overall student population, I believe this year, current year, we're at a 10-year low.
Yeah,
Mhm.
if you were a bad analyst, you would say, hey, for every new unit, the school population drops. That's not true. But just a matter of how you look at the data. And that's why I put that graph in there, because I just wanted to say it is challenging to do that piece. And it's critical because as Don asked, what is the most sensitive value here? It's what's happening with students. And that's why, at least for the Downs, we went back and we've asked the school department each year to track what's going on. Tell us, by type of unit, how many students we're getting.
And I just have one small thing, which you don't even need to respond to, but we use averages a lot. And I can remember my statistics professor saying that the average is the worst statistic as a measure of central tendency. It would occasionally be helpful to me, just so I don't get anxiety, to hear a median, maybe a mode every once in a while on some of these important
Yeah.
statistics, because as you well know, if you have a foot in hot water and a foot in cold water, on average, you're just about right.
Exactly. So, and some of these things is just hard to get. You can't get the average because you have to know every individual data point in order to get to the median, because you have to know what that midpoint is. So I agree with you. Median is always a better measure, but we don't have that. We don't always have that luxury. And I don't want to belabor this. I just wanted to show you the values per square feet. They're going up. And then there was the question about what is the increase? Why are we using 15% for the, yes, the second, third, and fourth valuation increases? And I'm going to tell you, I think the issue is, we're doing this on a 5-year basis now. And I don't think we haven't done revals.
This first 5-year look, I think it's gotta be an aberration.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable to think that we're gonna have property values increase by 50% in 5 years.
Yeah.
Is it 20%? Is it 25%? I mean, these are things that we can and should be tweaking as we go forward.
And we can certainly, do, high and a low. We can look at 15% and we can look at 25%. It's changing one number in the.
This
whole
is
set
one of
things.
the parts of the model that you can put your thumb on the scale. If you want to put that at 50%, it's going to make things look a lot rosier. That all of a sudden there's a lot more revenue to be able to.
But it also drives the tax rate down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's crazy. Everything is connected.
So we only have 5 minutes, and so what I would propose, I feel like this committee has looked at this. My perspective is, I think Karen has done a phenomenal job at trying to put something very accurate that can help the council make decisions. I think everybody is interested to see the Downs analysis, and I know we're gonna be very busy with budget probably in April and May. So we won't have an opportunity on our agenda. I don't think it's urgent that we see that, but if there is urgency on the part of the council, if the chair and vice chair and leadership, if you guys want to discuss this maybe being something that full council may want to understand this model a little bit better, but I think what people will want to see more is its application to the
Mhm.
downs.
Yep.
And so I would say that could be a non-action item or, something for council leadership to discuss if there's an opportunity. That's my opinion, rather than trying to put it on the finance committee at this point. Like, let's bring it to the council. Let's make sure they understand what we have as a tool and show an example of it being applied to the downs.
Right.
Our ask of you is to be our ambassadors to some extent.
Yep.
That in the context of why aren't we doing cost to serve, that you can help
Yeah.
with the public and your colleagues, whether it's the right time and the right place to use it. And also some level of confidence that, it is what it is, and it does a pretty good job for what we're asking it to do.
I think it's
No,
amazing,
I
Karen. You've
think it
done-
would be, it would be useful for the three of us to make a statement about this cost to serve model, which is what I think we were sort of asked to do, is would you look at this thing? Would you look under the hood? Would you ask hard questions about the assumptions and so forth? And I don't know that anybody said it, but would you render an opinion
Mhm.
as to what this thing means? And it seems like, we could cogitate on that a little bit, either, at a next meeting, discuss that a little and see if there are some key takeaways that all three of us can agree on, that we would put forward to the council. Then I'd feel like, this has been more than a 3 credit class and
Well, I mean, I think we
in
could just
cost
motion,
to serve.
we could just motion to endorse that we've done our work and we think that this is a good model for council to leverage for future decision-making and knowing it's gonna evolve over time.
Just, it's a tool and a host of tools,
Yeah,
not the only one.
yep.
Councilor Cushing, I don't want to suggest what you should do, but it might be a good topic for a council leader article.
That's a good point.
Just from one person's perspective, but
Mhm.
So I did want to, I
John,
was,
it'd be good if you did that.
Yeah, well, Counselor Shu doesn't know yet, but we have her doing a comfort plan.
so I didn't want to send this to you without context, but we've talked about, this is sort of this is initial results from using the types of things that were talked about. We looked at year 5, or I also put year 30. I'll send this to you so you can have more time to digest, but these are the main pieces. This is actually just the spreadsheet within the summary piece, and it's all automatically generated.
Yep.
So I'll run a couple of more scenarios for you. Looking at, the question I had is, I did put in 5% for the expenditures, townwide expenditures.
Mhm.
And is that a fair, do you want to keep 5%? Okay,
I think 5% makes sense. It's essentially what we're doing this year
yeah,
for our
we
budget.
try to be conservative
Right.
across the board, and I think that's a conservative assumption.
okay, so I'll leave the 5% in, and what you're seeing, and John, you asked about what the fiscal impact means. If it's positive, that's how much the model is saying it's generating above and beyond the cost to serve and the CEA. This is marginal costs.
So
I grabbed the wrong spreadsheet. I have one with
I apparently have seated all my 30 minutes.
sorry.
Can I just say, again, for impact fees, maybe similarly, like work with council leadership to see, because I think we just wanted to understand the plan, what the current plan is. I know we had
Yep.
a plan.
Yeah, this is on track. We intend to have new fees put in place. That's 2 new traffic fees and a new rec fee by the end of June.
Okay.
I am concerned with the amount of money that the ways these are shaking out. Rec fee, I'm not so concerned. It's $400 per bedroom. And I can share that with the methodology with you. But for the 2 traffic impact fees, it's almost $5,600 for one of them and $7,200 for the other per trip. Those are adding up, and then there'll be additional ones beyond that, so there's a point where I think affordability of housing stock comes into the conversation, and I'm a little concerned that we're potentially using impact fees as a way to deter growth, and that you can't use them for that. They need to reflect. So there might be a piece I want to come back to you on, or the
Okay.
council wants some opinion to take a portion of these fees. So
John,
we're moving forward.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there's just a couple more things about the downs, because you need reasons why the fiscal impact looks so good. So I just want to say the Downs is anywhere in any particular year, 31 to 40% non-residential. That is the key to why those costs start to be, look low. Over the life of the project, we're paying 18% of the shareable revenues to the Downs. Because remember, it gets triggered, the 10% dip gets triggered in this is saying year 18. And then the $2 million cap gets triggered 2 more years from there. So you're really at 10% for those later years. So that's why over the life of the project, 18% to the Downs, not 40.
Right.
And it's, sorry, had to get that out.
Great. All right, I just want to make sure,
This presentation is where.
This presentation is on, the last 2 slides are not, because I wasn't sure if we were going to get to them, and I didn't want them out there without context, so I'll add the 2 slides, and you can repost it, but it's posted. And I'm going to put the mechanical pieces, the spreadsheets, I'm going to post it on my website, so it's just
Yep.
easier.
But we should put it, part of this meeting agenda too,
Yeah.
just so it's easy to find.
all right, with that, I'm gonna see if there's anybody in the public who has a comment. I don't see anybody online except for Counselor McGee, so hopefully you heard all those things coming on the agenda, if you hear this. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Karen.